Okay, folks, I'm back. It's been a while. I had a little vacation and then some life troubles upon returning, but the 4 or 5 of you that are still tuning in are in for a treat. Last time we handled reconnecting a user or participant to a poll after they accidentally left the poll. Today, as promised, we'll handle any failed WebSocket connection errors as well as WebSocket exceptions in general that our server might want to send to our clients. As a reminder, you can follow along with this course at github.com Jacob SN Goodwin under the Ranker course repository. And here I have a branch for each of the tutorials. Today's will be number 22. So if you want to follow along from where we're starting today, just clone or dgit 21 and you can see some instructions here in getting started. All right, let's tear it up. Time to get going on handling socket exceptions. So back in the repository in this terminal, notice I have 2 terminal windows open in VS Code. I've started our main application, and let's see if I can even find the file here. Let's shrink this. Under this package JSON, the main command to run the front and back end applications is npm run start. I've also in this terminal run npm run storybook, which just starts storybook. And you can see the main application with DevTools open on localhost port 8080, and storybook is open on localhost port 6006. Recall that I already built some basic components that we can use in our application, and I put them in Storybook just so I could learn, and it's also hopefully helpful for you to see what these components look like. And today specifically, we'll be looking at this little snack bar or thing that pops down from the top. So I'm going to close this terminal window here, or just hit Command J. That's, you can hide it, I should say, not close it. And the first thing we'll do is add a piece of state to hold a socket IO error. And I'll reiterate that this error could happen on a failed connection, or it could be sent from the server for other reasons. Like, for example, if there's a database error, that would get propagated down and sent back to the client as some sort of general catch-all exception. So to do that, we will use this red error snack bar, which we'll go over soon. These components can be found in the client folder, source, components, and UI snack bar here. So if you want to take a look at the snack bar, go ahead and open this up to see how it looks. Now, in order to store errors, I want to define some types in our state. And let's add these maybe just below me. So the first is going to be a WebSocket error. So there will be a type and a message. If we wanted to be more specific, maybe we could do some sort of union like unknown or, some other error type. But for now, we'll just call it a string. As far as the client knows, these types are more specific on this server. Then I'm going to define an error that is unique, which is a union of this WebSocket error with type and message, and just adds a unique ID of a string. And that's mainly so that if we get multiple errors in our state at once and we want to clear an error, there will be a unique ID to identify which error we want to clear or acknowledge that we have read. Now I want to add a way of storing these unique errors, and we'll add that to our app state. Beneath socket, let's just add WS errors. So we'll have an array of errors. Like I said, the socket could send back multiple errors. Say the user tries to click to send one thing to the server and there's an error, and then they click another button and there's a second error. You could get multiple errors. In reality, that probably won't happen much, but that is why we are storing our errors as an array. And remember, each of these array items has a unique ID, so we can remove it or filter it out of this array. We need to define an initial state for WebSocket errors here. This is just our type, so we actually have to put the WS errors in the actual error state, and it will just be an empty array initially. Now I want to add some actions. Remember, our state has like the state fields, but then we also have this actions object, which holds different methods for updating or mutating the state. We're going to add two pretty simple methods here for adding a WebSocket error and removing a WebSocket error. So add WS error will receive something of type error. Now this is the error without the unique ID, this WS error type. And then we're going to take the array and then we'll add a new object, which is this error with a unique ID, which will be a 6-character long nano ID. So let's import nano ID. Then to remove the error, we're basically just going to set the state.ws errors with the current errors with the one we want to remove here that we pass in filtered out. So we'll just use your classic JavaScript array filter method here. So let's now move on a little bit more towards the UI. So in Storybook, we can kind of see some of the properties of this snack bar component, which we'll now add. We're going to use the error variant. So we have a standard, one that auto closes. So there's a field you can set to how long or after how long you want the snack bar to auto close. So if we set this to like 5,000 and then I go and I turn this show to true, after 5 seconds, it should auto close. Or if you have a standard one where you don't auto close it, meaning it's not set to anything, then it will close once you click this X. Or actually, you can see it fires an action, meaning it calls a prop called close. Or maybe it's called on close. Then we can also set an error color. I don't know why this is not showing as red. And that's probably because we have to go to type here and click error. And there you go. So this will be a red one with some white text. And if we click the X, it will close. Or we could also set the auto close duration, let's say 500 milliseconds. So it should be fast. Of course, I have to reinstantiate it. And there you go. So let's add this. So the idea here is that I want to add this somewhere at the top level of the app. The socket errors could happen on any of our pages, which we sort of maintain in this pages.typescript file. Remember, we have these sort of routes, even though we're not using any sort of router library. And so to use this at the top level, I'm just going to add it in app.typescript here. And remember, whenever we do any sort of loading where we want to block interaction with our app, we show this loader based on our loading state of our app state. So we could have put more complex loaders, but we just have kind of like one loader for the whole app. Let's add a snack bar beneath these pages, or actually I think I added it above these pages in my notes. So cool, we'll do it that way. And what we're going to do is for each of the errors in the state, we're going to map and display this snack bar. It'll auto close after 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds. And if the person clicks an X, the X or close button on the snack bar, we'll call that action to remove the error that we just had. Otherwise, it will automatically call on close. So basically what I'm trying to say is after 5,000 seconds, this on close will get called automatically because we have this auto close duration property. Let's just use command period to import this baby, and we're good to go there. The title of this snack bar is basically defined by the error's type, and that's coming from the server. We probably could have done some mapping of the error type name to like a more user-friendly type, but we'll just leave it as this for now. And the error also comes in with a message as we recently defined in our states types. So the component is good to go, but where and how will we actually add these errors using the actions.add_WS_error? Where we'll end up adding these errors is in our client folder, which we're working on the client app, so that makes sense. We have a socket.io.ts here. And remember that we wanted to show some sort of error if there was an error connecting. And we mentioned that socket.io itself provides a connect_error if there's any sort of failed connection. Right now, we were only logging and then setting our loading state to false with this action. So before we stop loading, let's just add this actions.add_WS_error. And we're going to define the error type here. In general, when our server sends an error back to the client, it will arrive with this type, but this sort of general connect error by socket.io doesn't provide a type. So we'll just provide it ourselves with a little message that says failed to connect to the poll. Maybe all these capitalizations are not necessary, but they will be there in my notes. Now, in general, though, if there is an exception on the server, we're going to send a message back with the type of exception instead of like connect error or connect. So let's add a socket.on method that handles these exceptions. Let's go here. And if there's an exception, it will come in with an error. Probably I should call this exception to be consistent. Whatever, I'll call it error. Anyway, so if we'll log that error to the console and we'll queue it up or add it to that array of WS errors. So let's see how we might demonstrate these errors. So let's go to our application running on port 880. Let's clear all these messages maybe for now. I'm going to create a poll here. And what's the topic? Why? My name is Jacob. Let's create this. And remember earlier, we created logic that if I refresh the page, it reconnects. So this is all happening with WebSockets. But what would happen if somehow we can't reconnect? Well, remember that in our application storage, if I go to the application of the DevTools and let me see if I can increase the size. Okay, that's much better. We have our access token. So when we reconnect, this access token is grabbed from local storage and sent to our server to like verify which poll we should be connected to, because there could be concurrent polls going on. So one way to tweak this is, I think to tweak these, you can right click them and say edit value. See how hard this is. And in a JSON web token, there are 3 parts. Let's look at this bottom one here. You can see there's a first part, then there is a period, and then there's a second part, which is the main body or the content of the token encoded as base 64 data. Then there's a final period, and this last part is called the signature. Well, if we change any character in the main body or the signature, that invalidates our JWT. So what I'm going to do is actually just kind of scroll to the end of this guy. Let's see if there's a way to do this. I don't know. Okay, let's just make this a lowercase m maybe. And then I'm going to refresh the page and we should fail to connect here because our token is now invalid. So there you go. Connection error. Really good. One problem we need to handle is it still pushed us to this waiting room. So that's something, maybe we'll fix that bug later on. Nevertheless, our little snack bar is showing for 5 seconds. And if I refresh one more time, I can close it sooner too. Now, another way that we could cause an error is by tweaking the code on the server to deliberately throw an exception. However, we're not going to really do that now because we don't have any useful interaction between our client and server yet. We'll be building that out in the following tutorials. As an example, we'll build out a way for a participant to nominate an answer to the poll question, and let's say that has an error on the server, then that would return an exception. I'm now going to stop this video and see if I can find a bug for this sending us to the waiting room. So I think I know how to fix this. This is going to be a little more live debugging, I guess. Now, when we mount the app, we have this whole effect that starts loading, gets that access token from local storage, and if there is no access token, we stop loading and we stay in the app page. However, if there is a valid access token, we set that, and then we initialize our socket. Now, this initialized socket is what is trying to connect, but then it's going to fail because we have an invalid token. In the pages component, we basically have an effect that looks at the current state of the poll and sends the user to our particular page depending on that. Now, this current state.me is derived from the access token, which we have. Now here we only modified the signature, but the client has no idea if the access token is valid or not. So actually, we are perfectly able to extract current state.me.id. And so it's basically sending us to the waiting room. So if we actually look at our poll's state here, is that we have the No errors. We have is admin false. That doesn't really matter. Actually, this person should be the admin, so we'll look at that. And then we have this token, which is an invalid token. And me is derived from this access token. But what is it that we don't have? We don't have any poll because we failed to connect. So what I want to do is make sure there's actually a poll in our state in order to send them to the waiting room. So maybe let's add some more and statements here. And there's probably a cleaner way to do this than two ands. But what we'll say is and current state.poll, I think it will be called. So let's save this and see what happens. Let's refresh the page. There we go. See, now we get the connection error, but we haven't moved. So maybe there's a better way to do that. And maybe I'll think about that between now and next time. But anyhow, I hope that was somewhat useful and gives you one idea of how you could show socket errors, because they're not exactly the same as handling errors that you would actually like send a request, then get an error. These are sent as messages in a live connection. In the next tutorial, we'll add UI for adding nominations, which will allow us to send a nominate event to our server via Socket.io. See you then.